Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of these little guys right here. These are two different versions of the CRKT Butte. First off though, before I go any further, I gotta let you know these guys were sent to me by CRKT. I actually reached out to them on this one because I took a look at it and went, wow, that's really attractive, and I get to make puns about Butte. And so that's a beautiful thing, but I told them as always, I'm gonna talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly. Might be a gem, might be junk. They did still send them along. Nonetheless, we have to assume these are the very best quality controlled ones forever. And by the way, for what it's worth, I just said, can I take a look at one of them? They sent both of these guys. So, but nonetheless, very best quality controlled one of these guys ever. And I'm doing my best not to let this affect the nature or the quality of my review, and keep an eye out for both of these guys in an upcoming charitable giveaway sort of thing. So, there you go. Next thing, let's do a little bit of size comparison. And what we're going to see here is these are actually here. I'll just use I'll use this guy. It's easier to see on my background. These guys are not that huge, but they're actually of reasonable size. Here it is against your Spidicodelica. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2. So what we see here is it's a reasonably sized knife. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2, which is kind of roughly an analog, both in terms of sharpened blade length. This actually has a little bit more sharpened length than the PM2, as well as in overall handle size, as well as this guy is actually thicker than the PM2. That is sort of worth noticing. But nonetheless, there is that. And so these are not small knives particularly. Next thing, these guys are designed by Burnley, Lucas Burnley, I believe, and this is named after actually Butte, not the city in Montana, although Butte is kind of nice. This is named after the geographical sort of situation that is around his workshop in the bend of the Oregon. So there you go. And this is actually maybe my favorite Burnley design that I've seen. He does a bunch of stuff for CRKT and otherwise, and this is a pretty attractive knife. There are two versions right here on my table. The very first one of them is the D2 down here. This is D2 with some G10 on the top of it here. This is $125, and it's available from your favorite retailer. Then there is the high-end version, this guy right here. This is an S35VN steel, and it is only available through CRKT, and it is $300. And we'll talk about that later on, rest yourself assured, but nonetheless, those are the two versions we got here. We got the fancy one with the carbon fiber and whatnot, and we got the regular one. Next thing, if you're looking at the name, this is Butte, not Butt. I just want to be very clear about that. No ifs, ands, or buttes. Then finally, CRKT, for those of you unfamiliar, is an American, U.S.-based company, but they do not give the origin country on their website. So we do have to assume these guys are being made over in China. In fact, a couple of retailers are making that leap. So these are made overseas in what I assume to be China. So let's talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of these very interesting knives right here. So to start with, these guys are, they have decent clips, right? And the clips are actually different. This is one of the things that is variable depending on the design itself. What we see here is that on the fancy version, we have a clip with a full-on standoff and everything, as well as a captive ball bearing kind of approach, and this clip works quite well. This is a very nice clip, and the overall size of it is pretty solid. I like that very much. And then on the other one, here we do have another clip, and it works well. And one thing that's worth noting is that the clip makes the knife hold like this. So this clip at the top of your pocket will naturally kind of tuck itself in against the side of the fabric. That's the case on both of these knives. And so that is a very nice little detail here. I do knock them a little bit for having a non-countersunk screw under a deep carry clip there. That's always a minor frustration. But at the same time, it is nice, and it is interesting that they used a different clip for the higher-end version. It's very clear that CRKT is really trying to bring these higher-end versions up to some parity. So there is that. Next thing, the carbon fiber on this higher end version is actually pretty nice. Gotta zoom in a little bit so you can see it a little bit more detailed here, but this is sort of a marbled carbon fiber sort of handle to it, and although you can see a little bit if you kind of look at it in the right light, you do actually see some of the milling lines right there. There are occasional little bits of void that you can kind of feel as you run your finger across it. Overall, this is actually pretty nice carbon fiber. This is done pretty well, and it actually looks pretty attractive. Gotta say, overall, the carbon fiber on here is, frankly, better than I've ever seen out of CRKT, and so I do appreciate that very much. Next thing, ergonomically, these are solid knives, right? In both of these cases, the clip is just wide enough that it doesn't really cause a major hot spot. You can feel it, but it's not terrible. Got a little bit of a thumb ramp here with some jimping. The flip tab provides a very compelling guard, and this just fits very nicely in my hand. And I gotta say, the upgraded one, given that the carbon fiber is rounded, oh boy, this, ergonomically speaking, is a very, very nice knife. This works very, very well in the hand and feels quite good for me. So I gotta say, ergonomically, very nice there. Next thing, this has multiple opening mechanisms. You have a set of thumb studs, and it is an ambidextrous set of thumb studs, so you can pop that guy out, although it's worth noting the clip is not ambidextrously mountable on either of the knives, so it is kind of ambi mostly in the opening, although you could also probably close it with your index finger if you're better with your left index finger than I am. But anyways, it is you're able to open it with the thumb studs or using the flipper tab down there at the bottom. Either one of those things works. In my experience, I think I slightly prefer the flipper tab just because they've gone with a Shabazz-style ziggurat thumb stud here, which is not always the most comfortable thing, frankly, not ever the most comfortable thing, but it is fine and it does work. And so if you are a if you are a thumb stud aficionado, then you could absolutely go that route. And frankly, you could even grind off the flipper tab. It's an option for you too. Be careful, etc. Not responsible for any injury, but nonetheless, that is something you might be able to do if you were really focused on the thumb stud approach. So there is that. Next thing, this guy is a deadbolt lock from CRKT. You'll want to watch the disassembly to get a sense of what that means. But basically, this little button right here goes all the way through to this piece in the back. And so when I press up on this button, what you're going to see is this little part pushes out. And when this little part pushes out, a little protuberance ceases being embedded in the blade and allows the blade to shut. There is, and you can actually see that this guy kind of hangs out a little bit higher when the knife is closed. And then when I pop it open, here, I'll see if I can do this for you. Yeah, it seats itself all the way into the blade. This results in a very secure lockup as well as a pretty strong lock, right? This has survived some spine whacking, etc. It is a very nice lock, and it is also relatively ambi-friendly, right? So as a result, I've been pretty impressed with the deadbolt lock, right? There's a little tiny bit of stick on this guy right here, but it's not the end of any particular worlds, and, it has been going away as I've carried it and used it a little bit more. So the deadbolt lock is a is a lock that I haven't seen that much. It's a CRKT exclusive as far as I'm aware. It had mostly been used on much larger knives. This is starting to get into the range of a more reasonable everyday carry piece, and you know what? It still works here pretty well. So that's nice. Next thing, the blade on these guys is nice. You have a D2 steel on this guy here, which at $125, but the thing is, they've done a pretty good job grinding it down to something that is reasonably thin behind the edge, and so that's nice. And then on the higher end version, you have S35VN, which is a steel that is absolutely good to go. And again, the grind is such that I'm not particularly worried about it, but it's a nice blade with a nice little bit of swedge on the top here. Little clip point, Butte to do it, a little bit of the top of there. I gotta say, as well as this kind of sharp and angular plunge there, it's kind of cool, right? I like the blade. Next thing, I gotta say, they're doing weird things here, right? The deadbolt lock is unique. I said that's not something that I've ever seen from any other maker. I think it is a CRKT exclusive, and it is, this is a smaller version of that, but they're also doing the other weird thing, which is they are assisting the knife. This is an assisted pocket knife. I'm going to hold on to the blade here because it's a little easier to show it off this way, but on a normal knife that has no springs or anything like that, if I push this open, it would just kind of it would stop when I stop moving. But with this guy, what you're going to see is I advance this to a certain point, and then suddenly the handle flies open itself, meaning that the blade would do the same thing, right? If I do it with the flipper tab, suddenly it comes flying open at a certain point. There is a spring in there, and again, watch this assembly. You'll see just how it works. There is a spring in there that will propel the blade open. Now, I got to be honest with you. I'm not a big fan of the assist, and we'll be coming back to that later on. But the thing is, trying the deadbolt lock is weird. Trying an assist is weird. Combining them together, that's extra weird. It's not necessarily for me, but in a world full of really boring pocket knives, I will take weird in an instant, right? So at some level, you know what? I'm not going to drag them too hard for it because they're doing something that is unique, and the world is full of stuff that is not unique. Then finally, on the good side, I do appreciate the fact that they've made a higher-end version of it, right? This is something I very much asked for from CRKT kind of over and over again, because CRKT is a company that very often will do really cool designs, really unique things, but they'll do them at levels that are not necessarily as attractive to higher-end collectors. I can see this being a knife that could be interesting if you love the design, if you're a Burnley fan, for instance, or you just really like the deadbolt lock or something like that. This gives even a more seasoned collector, if you will, that is a collector who's got a much bigger problem, like I have a problem, I'll admit that, it gives them an option to pick one of these guys up in a format that is going to really fit in with a higher-end collection. So I do applaud them doing higher-end versions of some of their stuff, right? We'll talk about the pricing a little bit later on, but it is good to see that. And it's something I appreciate, and it's something that I hope to see them continuing to do forward in the future there. That way, if somebody falls in love with this, they can pick up one of these. And so to me, all of that is the good, is that I like the higher-end take on it. They're trying weird things. It's got a nice blade, a deadbolt lock, multiple opening mechanisms, very good ergonomics on this guy, very nice carbon fiber on the high-end version here. Nice clips overall. On the great side, to me, I just like this design. I think this is a really nice design. It's very simple. Look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it is, oh my God, crazy unique like some of the other stuff we've seen out there in the world, but at the same time, you know what? It works, right? It feels good in the hand. Ergonomically, it's very nice. Aesthetically speaking, I think this is a pretty attractive-looking blade. I think it's an attractive-looking knife overall. It's got enough little details here that I feel like, you know what? This is a cool little design. And even the back spacer here, which is holding the lanyard hole, but really doesn't matter because, well, it doesn't press. There are no hard edges or anything like that. This is, as I said, although very simple in some level, this may be my very favorite of Burnley's designs. And especially on this higher-end model, which, you know, am I a big black-coated blade fan? No, not particularly, but I gotta say, this ends up being a pretty attractive piece. This is an attractive knife to me. And so for me, at least, I would say that would be the gray. I very much do like seeing attractive knives like this with nice lines and things like that. On the bad side, to start with, as I mentioned during the disassembly, and as you saw, there is a lot of machinery in here. The deadbolt lock, for all of the benefits that it may have, is very complicated, right? You end up having to, you know, remove screws in different ways, and there are multiple layers to the thing. And then on top of that, they've added in an assist. As a result, this is a knife that takes, you know, a good amount longer than a lot of your basic liner locks and such to go ahead and work on, to disassemble, etc. And adds a bunch of complexity in there. And so that is a thing you want to keep in mind and you want to consider, right? This may not have the robustness of some, and robustness here, I mean like to grime and gunk and things like that, but even still, it's an assist. It should be okay, but there's just a lot going on in here, right? There is a lot of complexity, where in many knives there is just simplicity. So do keep that in mind. Next thing, both of these guys need a larger sharpening choil. This choil here doesn't quite go out far enough, and as a result, you end up seeing this little smile right here at the bottom, where the blade ends up coming up, and as a result, you end up with a little tiny bit of a recurve in this area here. That's just not great, right? It just means that this hole didn't go out far enough, or that they didn't pull the grind far enough back. I'm not exactly sure which is which, but at the same time, this just needs to extend out maybe 2 or 3 millimeters further, and they'd be good to go. But that is a little bit frustrating, right? And it makes this guy harder to sharpen than it otherwise needed to be. So there is that. Next thing, as I mentioned earlier, the carbon fiber looks great, but if you look closely on it, there is actually a fair amount of, you can see a lot of the machining marks on here, right? They've kind of partially polished it, right? And at some level, that's going to add a little bit of gription to it, and so I can't get too bent out of shape. That's why this is early in the bed. But at the same time, it definitely, there are, like, okay, see right here, it kind of distracts a little bit from the pattern of the carbon fiber. So that is a thing to consider. Next thing, both of these guys are pocket pecking a little bit with this flipper tab sticking out here, and there is a little tiny bit of chamfering here, but these are kind of sharpish corners, and so this is going to be pecking whatever's in your pocket all day long, right? Weird looking bird with the deadlock on there, but nonetheless, a deadbolt that is. So that is a thing. Next thing, the lock on this guy, on the smaller versions, I like the deadbolt lock in a lot of ways, but in this particular case, I'm really benefiting from having small fingers because I can push my finger in order to disengage this lock. Let's see how far I need to go in. I need to press in at least this far for that lock. And so if I have gigantic meat paws, it's going to actually be a little bit difficult, I think, to get my finger down into exactly this little area here. Into this little crater here, in order to be able to unlock this knife. So that is something you're going to want to keep in mind, right? I can totally see why they started on larger knives with the deadbolt, and I'm kind of wondering whether in the future we're going to end up seeing them any smaller, because it feels like we're kind of reaching the size limit of the deadbolt lock itself on the lower end here. It is worth noting, by the way, that this little crenellated mesa sort of situation is actually a very good thing, because it means that as you're holding this guy and using it, your fingers are nowhere near the deadbolt, but even if, and by the way, same thing for a lefty, but even if you were to accidentally press on there, the little crenellated ring means that this really isn't going to accidentally close on your hand, and even if it did, you got a flipper tab right there. So yeah. Anyways, so that is a thing, but it is a little bit harder to get your finger down in there and access that. Next thing, I gotta say, deadbolt plus assist, I'm not convinced by. I'm not generally convinced by the assisted knives generally, but with these guys, what you kind of end up having to do is, so you unlock it, and then there's kind of a separate step where you're pushing back against the assist. Unlike, for instance, some of the other deadbolts where you just press it in and then use your hand to kind of flick it back in there. The assist means that's not going to happen, unfortunately. So I think this is actually an area where a bigger hand is going to have an easier time because you can reach back further with your index finger without the flipper tab digging into here. But it just never was a nice thing to close one-handed, right? I can do it. It's okay. And I'd probably get better at it if I carried this every day, but at the same time, not a big fan of the deadbolt plus the assist. Those two locks don't feel, or the lock and the assist don't feel complementary to me. Next thing, these guys are heavy, right? Let me throw these guys on a scale real quick. And what we're going to see here is that we've got, let's see here, blade length here. We're looking at just under 3.5 inches. And weight-wise, we're looking at 3.94 ounces for the carbon fiber and 5 ounces for the G10, right? Ooh, boy, that's a good bit here. I kind of suspect that, yeah. So if you're looking for lightweight, you're going to want to go with the carbon fiber, but neither of them are really light in the classical sense of things, right? These are both relatively heavy, and they're also relatively thick, right? Both of these knives are, I'll put this guy up next to the Spyderco PM2 here, and what we're going to see, yeah, the PM2 is already not a thin knife, but this guy is even thicker than that. And so as a result, yeah, these are thick, they're heavy. You definitely do feel them in the pocket. This guy a little bit less so, but still. Yeah. Next thing, price-wise, these are up there, right? $125 for the base model. For the base model down here, which feels a little bit on the high side, especially in D2 steel. But then $300 for the S35 VN version, which is, ooh, that's kind of up there. Both of those prices feel a little bit behind their competition in terms of value, right? I'm glad that they took the effort to do things fundamentally right, like, for instance, using a reasonable steel D2, or even better, S35 VN, and there aren't really a lot of cheapy corners cut, in my estimation, right? This doesn't feel like a knife where it's just like, wow, they were really lazy there. So at some level, I'm appreciative of the fact that it didn't get accountanted to death. Yeah, we'll call that a verb now. But at another level, boy, they're a little behind the competition in terms of price there. And next thing, you're welcome to consider these next two bits as bias, right? I'm going to fully admit to this. For me, assisted knives, that's not a great solution, right? It is a very strange choice in 2022, right? I kind of joked, I think, in a prior review that it's kind of like you see everybody else running out of a building and then CRKT's running in. Many companies have gotten to the point where they don't need assist to deliver great manual action, and then suddenly CRKT's like, assist everything! And I did not think this was going to be assisted. When I sort of talked to them and placed the order, I had no idea. Then I got it. It's like, oh my God, they assisted it? Really? For $300? That, to me, ooh. And the reason that I don't care for it just generally is it makes it a little bit harder to close, and you just don't need it, right? A well-tuned detent doesn't require an assist, and it feels just as good. But look, I don't care for that. And it bothers me a little bit that they've gotten all in on the assist train, but for some people, clearly they must be selling. Clearly people must love them. So, okay, whatever. But the thing that bothers me more is that neither of these knives, and the last thing on the bad side is that neither of these knives can be de-assisted, right? You are not able to remove the assist. And for $125, and let alone for $300, that feels like a bit of a shame, right? This is a nice design, but the assist is, at least for me personally, a little bit of a deal breaker. Right? That doesn't mean that it needs to be a deal breaker for you. This is, I'm willing to admit, this is as much a function of my own personal preference as any. But the thing is, it's very, very nice when assists are done in such a way that you can take them out and the knife has an excellent manual action. Right? Because that way, if you like the boom, wow, it's open, then you can do that. But if you don't, it doesn't matter, right? But this is not able to be de-assisted, and I get it. At some level, that's why this is not in the ugly category, even at this price point. The deadbolt lock does not provide a detent of its own, and so effectively what they've done here, by using the assist, they get a detent for free, because the spring force, that is holding the knife shut right now. There's no detent ball or anything like that, so the force of the spring is what keeps the blade closed. until it helps it open. So I get it that they would have had to add like a separate little detent ball kind of thing on an arm like we saw in the Cricket Shock, that's XOC when you go to search for it. But at the same time, that's a very strong choice made for us. The best thing that an assist can be is optional, and it kind of bothers me at this kind of a price point that they're making that decision for me. Some may love them, but I sure don't. And so to me, all of that is the bad, is that this cannot be de-assisted, and that's kind of a strange choice in 2022 to assist it at all. It is very pricey, it is very heavy. The deadbolt lock plus the assist is a little trickier to close. It's a little hard to access the deadbolt lock if you got smaller hands. It's pocket packing a bit. The carbon fiber finishing is a little bit off still, although that may be for gription. It does need a bigger sharpening choil, undoubtedly, on both models, and there is a lot of complexity in this knife that doesn't necessarily need to be there with other locking mechanisms and other opening mechanisms. For me, so on the ugly front, for me, the assist, I gotta be honest, that feels ugly to me, but that is my own take, and clearly some people love them. And let me know in the comments if you are on Team Assist. I'm curious to hear what, what happened to you? Who hurt you? More importantly, let me know that. But for me, that's ugly, but I don't think it's ugly for everybody, and I'd sure like to, yeah. Anyways, no need to beat that dead horse here. The Butte, the dead horse. Okay. So, final conclusion. This is a kind of a strange knife to review because there's a lot of good, right? It's got a nice clips, pocket clips, that is, nice carbon fiber, good ergos, few opening choices, deadbolt lock, nice blade, some kind of weird approach to knife making generally. It does have a higher end model, and the design is very attractive. It's a classic. But there is a lot going on here. It needs a bigger sharpening choil. It is pocket packing a bit. The lock is hard to access, and that doesn't really interact well with the assist. It is heavy, it is pricey, and it cannot be de-assisted even though it is assisted. And so ultimately, I kind of feel like this is a very weird knife, because in isolation, this is actually very nice, right? And it's one of Cricket's more compelling knives of late, right? Because it's got an attractive design. It's got a heavy helping of weird, which I really do think is one of CRKT's biggest strengths right now. They have a stable of really great designers like Burnley and others who make really nice designs, and they do things with those knives that are very unique, rather than just cranking out another liner lock, another frame lock, etc. So in isolation, I feel like it's reasonably compelling, and I am absolutely sure that there are going to be people in the world who buy this as a knife, and they love it, and they carry it for the rest of their damn lives, right? These are absolutely fine. If you love what it's doing, then you know what? These are great. But when you look at the rest of the market, it gets a little bit more, well, suspect, because the biggest question becomes the value. $125 is nowhere near budget friendly, right? CRKT has for a long time been in the budget kind of country, and this is decidedly not it, right? For a person who loves assists and loves the deadbolt lock, or at least wants to love it, or loves the design, you know what? The budget model is well done enough to be very plausible, right? But even still, D2 north of $100 is a little less impressive, and there are a bunch of great knives under $125 if you don't need the assist. You don't need the weird deadbolt lock. If you don't need that, then this isn't really going to be an obvious choice. And the high-end model, I gotta be honest, it's a little rough value-wise, right? If you hold this up next to a Rayot knife or a Wee knife or a Best Tech or something from another Chinese manufacturer, at $300, the value just doesn't feel there, right? This is S35VN, when that's very clearly M390 territory, right? You want really high-end stuff, and the finishing here is fine, but at $300, fine is not good enough. At $300, it needs to be great. It needs to be going extra miles. It needs to be intricate, right? You need to be way more than fine. And it's kind of funny, because CRKT is a company with a long history of working with overseas OEMs, yet it feels like they consistently get less value for the dollar than other companies from those OEMs. I don't know, to be fair, who they're using for this, but it really feels like they're still a little bit behind. This is a very nice knife. Again, in isolation, this is pretty damn nice. But when you look at what else you can buy for $300 from other companies, that's where it starts to feel coming up short. And so my feeling on the high-end model is you have to really love this design. You have to really, really love what you got here. You get one of these and you fall head over heels, then you might pick one of those guys up and you'll probably love it. I think that's what this comes down to, the whole thing, right? If you just want a knife, there are a ton of those available for the price of either of these guys, right? But for this to be a real serious contender for you, you need to love three things. First, you need to love the locking mechanism. That's not a particularly big ask, honestly. It's unusual. Yeah, it adds a bit of complexity, but it's quite effective. I feel like this is a very nice piece. You also need to love the design, and again, that's not particularly hard. This knife is a real Butte. But finally, you have to love that assist, because in this case, the assist is baked in. And I gotta be real with you, in this particular case, it's a little bit of a pain in the Butte, having to, deal with both the button and the assist. It just feels like it loses one of the benefits of the deadbolt lock there. But ultimately, if you're loving all three of those things, if you're loving the locking mechanism, you're loving the design, and you're loving assist, then I think you're gonna want to pick one of these guys up. No ifs, ands, or buttes. But if you're not a fan of any of those things, and you pay this kind of money, I think you'll wind up feeling more than a little bit Butte hurt. So anyways, there you go. I hope this has been interesting to you and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.